Well, you might have heard the positive news coming out of Pfizer. They say that their new test results show its COVID-19 vaccine is 95% effective, with no serious safety concerns. The results show the vaccine protects older populations with higher mortality rates, and it's consistent across age, gender, race, and ethnicity. The vaccine is one of several that Canada has pre-ordered, and we could receive early next year. The U.S. drug maker will apply for emergency use of their vaccine in the coming days. So, how significant are these findings, and what could it mean if emergency use is granted? Dr. Raywat Deonandan is an epidemiologist and associate professor in the Faculty of Health Sciences at the University of Ottawa. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Well, what do you make of this? I mean, how encouraging is this latest development from Pfizer?
It's really encouraging. The 90 to 95% effectiveness, that's extraordinary. Remember, when we first started making COVID vaccines, the threshold for acceptance was set at 50%. And the seasonal flu vaccine gives us somewhere between 40 and 70% effectiveness. So to get 90% and above is really quite good. And so the light at the end of the tunnel just went on. So things are looking pretty good.
They report 95%. Are we able to take that at this point at face value?
Yes, it will be close to that at the end of the day. Remember, the stopping point for this particular clinical trial was when they got to 164 COVID cases. They reported at 94 COVID cases, which is more than halfway there. And since they got a few more cases since weeks ago, it's got up to like 95%. So we're near the end, and as each new data point comes in, the effectiveness keeps on going up. At this point, even if the remaining cases prove to be entirely in the vaccine group, it will still be an extraordinary effectiveness score. So yes, it's going to be a high score regardless when the clinical trial officially ends.
Are there any lingering questions, though, still about the vaccine? You know, any perhaps details that you know of or logistical challenges that it might present?
Well, there are some scientific unknowns. First of all, we don't know how long immunity lasts. That's a big one. And we can't know because we've been living with this virus for only a few months. So it might only last as much as a year, in which case we'll have to do another round of booster shots. We don't know really what the safety profile is yet. Initial reports suggest that it's very safe, but we don't know until we get the full data profile. We can go over it with a fine-tooth comb. And really, we won't know when the full safety is upon us until about 4 months into deployment of the vaccine. But all indications suggest that there are no serious safety issues. We also don't know if it prevents infection or just disease, and that's an important distinction. So the way the trial is set up, it only measures whether or not you get symptoms. Right now, it seems to prevent people from getting symptoms of the disease, which is fine, but we don't know if it produces what we call sterilizing immunity, which is actually prevention of the virus from entering your cell in the first place. So it could be that people who get this vaccine end up not getting sick, but they can still transmit it to others. We don't know that yet. And it may not matter if everybody gets it. Now,
that's a really important distinction.
Yeah. But we'll know that soon. We just don't know it now. And of course, the big unknown is deployment. That's the second half of the miracle that needs to happen, because this is a miracle. Let's make no doubt. Our biosciences industry has manufactured a miracle in a test tube in record time. The second half of that miracle is, do we have the administrative and logistics acumen to deliver it into enough arms sufficiently to get us out of the pandemic in record time?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so still some big questions to get the answers to. And what about Moderna? I mean, they reported similar results with their vaccine earlier this week. Also, AstraZeneca vaccine out of Oxford is showing some promising results in the elderly. We're dealing with now results coming out, right, from a number of vaccines and probably even more in the coming days. What are the challenges with potentially having multiple formulations that are available to the public?
Well, first, it's a good thing to have multiple formulations. It gives us diversity to choose from. And it's going to be true that different subpopulations will respond differently to different formulations. So if we can figure out which kind of pre-existing condition, maybe the diabetics respond in different ways than the non-diabetics to certain formulations, so we can target the vaccines accordingly. The Pfizer vaccine requires a deep freeze. The Moderna doesn't, but they both have similar technologies. So maybe the remote communities can benefit from the vaccine that doesn't require deep freeze. The challenge, though, is that all of the formulations so far require at least 2 shots, several weeks apart. and you cannot get a second shot from a competitor formulation. So we have to be able to keep track of what shot you got, so that when you come back, you don't get the wrong one. This sounds easy, but for people who don't have a family doctor, they have to remember it on their own. And we have technology to track these things. The CAN Immunize system is used for children across the country. But for the homeless or people without regular health care, it could be quite challenging. So the Americans are planning to use a card where you get a card that says the formulation you got, the dose, and the date, and you present it again several weeks later so you get the same thing. But we need something similar, a data tracking process, so that we can really make sure we know who got it. So that we can also track how close we are to herd immunity, so that we know when we can start opening things up again. All this depends on so much of our administrative infrastructure to work well. So our work is just beginning, and this is going to be a profound public health challenge this next year.
Mm-hmm. And what about the fact that Pfizer is looking to apply for emergency use authorization of their vaccine? What does that mean?
So the FDA has created several criteria for what EUAs mean. 4 criteria. 1 is it has to be for a life or death situation. 2 is the product in consideration must show extreme scientific effectiveness. 3 is a risk-benefit analysis shows that it's useful. And 4 is there is no alternative. Now, these are all debatable criteria here, especially the last one. Is there an alternative to a vaccine? Maybe there is. Restrictions and mitigation, etc. But they're applying. And if they get it, it means that they can use the vaccine on a limited basis in some areas while the trial continues. And it looks like they're going to get it. Moderna will probably get it as well. And we anticipate tens of millions of doses available to Americans by the end of the year as a result. Now, that's controversial for a number of reasons. One is the clinical trial continues. So it's strange to be in the placebo group when you know there are people out there getting the actual vaccine who know they're getting it with the expectation that it works. So it may be unethical to give someone in the placebo group a placebo. And then for the other vaccines that are still undergoing trials, the control group is a placebo. But if we know that this other vaccine exists and has been authorized, maybe that should be the control group. We call that a non-inferiority trial. So ethically, it is interesting, and some people think it should not be done as a result. There's another process we can use called expanded use, where a product that's still in clinical trials can be used by people who don't qualify for the clinical trial. But I think it's going to get EUA authorization, and as a result, it'll be probably licensed in the U.S. pretty soon. And here in Canada, Health Canada is monitoring these developments in real time. That speeds up the process by which we can get it here, because they don't wait for all the data. They assess the data as it comes so that they can make a decision quickly.
Yeah, because I would imagine that if it does get approval, I mean, the implications for Canada would also be huge.
They would, but not as much as you might think. We're fairly independent when it comes to these decision-making processes, and that's a good thing. So we use our own set of values, our own criteria, our own scientists to assess the data. Just because it's approved in the U.S. doesn't mean it's going to be approved here. It's got to go through our process first.
Right. But again, there's a lot riding on this, right? I mean, this is COVID. That's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, there's a lot of political pressure.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that we can stand firm and be independent. Yeah. But I think because the criteria is similar and the scientists are similar and the data is the same, that we will make the same conclusions as they will.
Just a few seconds left. I mean, how soon could we see these vaccines roll out to the public?
Well, we know that Ontario has ordered, 4 million doses, close to it, by the end of March. That means about 2 million people. My numbers might be wrong there. A certain number of people will get it in their arms by March. But that's probably healthcare workers and maybe the extremely vulnerable. After that, maybe police and firemen and ambulance drivers. Then after that, maybe teachers and transit workers and so forth. For the average person to start getting it, maybe not until the end of next year.
All right. Really appreciate your updating us on this. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
That is Dr. Raywat Deonandan, and he is an epidemiologist and associate professor in the Faculty of Health Sciences at the University of Ottawa.